Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Conflation Station, where I try to clear up some of the confusion that has come to define modern politics. In a previous episode, I spoke about federalism, what it is and how it works in American government. Today, I'd like to dig a bit deeper and discuss specific aspects of checks and balances and how deeply they permeate through the political system. Probably the most well-known example of checks and balances in America is legislation, the lawmaking process. The first step in this somewhat lengthy process is for someone to have an idea. This may seem obvious, but it's an important step in the process, as anyone in the world can have an idea for a bill, not just sitting Congress members. The next step is for a Congress member to propose the bill to their respective House and Congress. This is known as proposal power and differs largely from the last step, as this power only belongs to sitting Congress members. The bill is then sent to the most relative committee. Committees are smaller groups that help to specialize and streamline the legislative process in ways that I will cover in a future episode. At this point, the committee chair organizes an agenda, determining which bills are worked on by the committee. If a bill finds itself on the agenda, it will first go through a process of hearing and markup, where the committee will discuss and make changes to the bill as they find necessary. Next, the committee will vote to report the bill to Congress. Bills that pass this vote are sent to one of the two houses in Congress, either the House of Representatives or the Senate, whichever house the proposer or sponsor of the bill belongs to. The House in question will then discuss and debate the bill on the floor of that House and then vote whether or not to pass the bill. Bills that pass this vote are sent to the other House in Congress, firstly to the most relevant committee, where the same committee processes take place. Passing a second committee vote here means that it continues to the second House in Congress and undergoes the same floor activity. If the second House in Congress had to make changes to the bill in order to pass it, the bill gets sent back to its original House for another vote. If the second House makes no changes to the bill and votes to pass it, or if it passes the second vote in the original House, it leaves Congress and goes to the President for approval. If the President approves of the bill, it will be given a presidential signature certifying it as a law. If the President disagrees with the bill, they have a supreme veto power, meaning that he or she can strike down the bill immediately. However, if a bill is sent to the President and receives no answer after 10 days, it automatically gets passed as a law. At this point, federal courts, namely the Supreme Court, may review the law, and if they find that it violates the Constitution, they also can immediately strike it down. This threefold process between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the federal government is almost definitely the most well-known example of checks and balances in the United States, but we skipped over a very important one back at Congress. So we've touched briefly on the subject of the congressional houses and how they operate, but what exactly are they? How are they comprised, and why? This is also a crucial part of checks and balances, functioning alongside other ideas such as the Electoral College, which I'll cover a little bit later, and dual federalism, which was covered right here by me, so check it out. By this I mean that being a federal system, the makeup of Congress strives to maintain state individuality by creating a balance of power between the states. Let's take a look at how this works in the form of congressional houses. First, let's take a look at the House of Representatives. This house is comprised of 435 representatives, with the number of representatives from each state being determined by the state's population. The higher the population of the state, the more representatives they have in the House, and the more legislative power that state has as a whole. This is to ensure that the highest concentration of people are represented as accurately and directly as possible, but it obviously poses a massive threat to states with a smaller population. This is where the Senate comes in. Comprised currently of 100 senators, with the allocation always remaining at 2 senators for each state, this House in Congress makes every state equally recognized and powerful. The Senate by itself would also be unfair, as low-population states would have incredible power to dictate laws for the entire nation, exactly the same but inverse to the unfairness posed by the House of Representatives if it were to act alone. However, since both houses are equally powerful, Congress exists in a state of balance between high and low population states when it comes to making laws that affect the entire country. In a way, it mixes two forms of democracy, direct democracy and representative democracy, wherein a direct democracy is more based upon population, as a representative democracy is more based upon balance. But I'll cover that deeper in a future episode. One system discussed often, especially in recent years, is that of the Electoral College. Similar to the bicameral Congress, or a Congress with two houses, the Electoral College strives to achieve a balance between state power. Each state has a number of electorates representing the state allocated by population. Higher population states have more electorates, and thus more electoral power when it comes to presidential elections. In this way, it functions much like the House of Representatives, but it also functions a lot like the Senate in that each individual's vote counts more in a lower population state compared to the higher population states. Another way this works to provide a balance of state power is by making smaller population states better recognized and represented. In order to be elected, a candidate must secure 270 electoral votes, which simply isn't possible if smaller population states are ignored. This is why electoral maps often look like this, and function less like this. Another important aspect of a more representative democracy is the jury system. Often it is said in American law that a suspect is always to be considered innocent until proven guilty, but how high is that bar set? As it turns out, pretty high. Primarily is the burden of proof. In a court of law, and usually in most other places, the burden of proof lies with the accuser, meaning the responsibility, or the burden, of providing evidence for the supposed crime belongs to the accuser. In a court of criminal law, the accuser is the government, represented by a prosecutor. This is also why trials never end with a verdict of innocent, but rather not guilty, meaning that the prosecution failed to provide enough evidence to convince the jury of guilt. Another important aspect of representative democracy found in the jury system is a unanimity clause. At the end of each jury trial, the jury must reach a unanimous decision, 12 votes one way or the other. If the jury cannot come to an agreement, it is called a hung jury, and a not guilty verdict is essentially the result. In other words, it takes the entire 12-member jury to convict someone of a crime. A majority in the jury is simply not enough. Well, thank you all yet again for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. That will make it much easier for me in the future to produce more timely and hopefully better quality content. Also, please feel free to leave a comment with any questions, corrections, or suggestions, especially any suggestions for topics you might like to see me cover. If you missed it, I highly recommend my last episode where I talk about the Constitution and how it was pretty much the best thing in the world until someone decided to slice bread, after which there was of course no contest. And I'll see you all next time, right back here.